Family is love to me. I have friends who are every bit as much family to me as family.
Yeah.
And I have family who I hardly know. I do have a different feeling about ancestors, which is that I used to think that I loved my ancestors, but I actually don't think we can love our ancestors. My father had passed away. I knew that I felt like there had been secrets in my father's life and in my mother's life too, but I had known that he had been married twice before. I knew about the first marriage because a half-sister, so that was hard to hide.
Right.
I didn't know about the second marriage until I was going to college. And he had married a woman who died shortly after their marriage. And when I sort of hit the age that my father was when all this happened to him, it struck me how young he was. He was doing something where I recognized my own gestures.
Right.
I saw the way that I moved my hands.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was the first thing I saw because initially I didn't see myself in this elderly man. I was sitting next to my husband and I kept on saying, wait, do we look alike? I think we look so much alike, but that's not what I first saw. What I first saw was this, this. People would constantly say things to me like, you don't look Jewish. You can't possibly be Jewish. There's no way. I mean, people get mad at me, think I was lying.
Yeah.
And I would double down and say, raised 2 sinks, 2 dishwashers, kosher, you know, fluent Hebrew, parents, grandparents, yeshivas all over the world. And why was I doubling down? I have more than one answer to that now. I would have said at the time, because I found it offensive.
Welcome to Identified, where we explore, challenge, and redefine the traditional concepts of family and identity. In this episode, I'm joined by best-selling author and podcast host, Dani Shapiro.
On my father's side, I grew up with a great deal of family lore, with so many stories.
That had been passed down.
That had been passed down, mostly for a couple of reasons. One was that my father had grown up in a family that had come to this country from Eastern Europe a couple of generations before, which was unusual for Jewish families. They had done well, so there was money for things like portraits, and photographs. And even, my grandfather had one of the early motion picture cameras, and he and his father went in the early 1930s back to the family shtetl, the village in Poland, to see, I guess it would be my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather's grave. There's footage of that, ended up in a documentary film
You've
years
seen
later.
this.
Oh, yeah. And so...
nobody's seen footage of their family.
No. I mean, when I was a college student, I was sitting at the Paris Cinema in New York City watching a documentary called Image Before My Eyes that had footage in it of the Shapiros, of my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-grandfather. And you see all the villagers come around like these American visitors who, have left and, done well, and, they're treated like just honored guests. And it's also all the more haunting because everyone in all those villagers perished.
It was in the 30s,
within 10 years, they all.
God.
That was tremendously formative for me. There was a synagogue in New York City that had part of it that was named after my grandfather, and he was a founder of things and had his name on things. And so, and then my father's younger sister, my Aunt Shirley, who was my closest to me of all of my relatives, and still is, who's now 98. She was kind of the family historian. So if a family doesn't have one of those, then the stories get lost.
Right.
Shirley wasn't a historian. She was like a poet historian. She was this extraordinary teller of stories.
Wow.
And she had details she would remember of even what people were wearing, or I'm going to fast forward. But many years later, when I was in my early 30s, I wrote a personal history piece for The New Yorker. And it was, my father had passed away. I knew that I felt like there had been secrets in my father's life and in my mother's life too, but I had known that he had been married twice before. I knew about the first marriage because a half-sister, so that was hard to hide.
Right.
I didn't know about the second marriage until I was going to college. And he had married a woman who died shortly after their their marriage. And when I sort of hit the age that my father was when all this happened to him, it struck me how young he was to have been through all that.
Right.
And I pitched a piece to the New Yorker, and they gave me an assignment. And when you're a young writer, I mean, it was my first big assignment for the New Yorker. It was the dream. Yeah. I got totally stuck when I first started because it was like, I kept on picturing it in New Yorker font before I had written a single solitary word.
Of course, yeah.
I was writing a story in which both of the main characters were long dead. Most of the people who knew anything were gone, although I did find some of them. But my Aunt Shirley, when I sat down with her, said, Dorothy was wearing a corduroy, or like a coral-colored silk blouse. Or she drank tea from a cracked china cup. It was like at a level of such, she just was so present that she never missed anything.
That's incredible. My mother has that. She can tell you that a lot of, I interviewed her a lot for my memoir, and a lot of it is, well, I know it was on this date because I was wearing this, and I actually bought the fabric for that dress at this store, and I sewed it that summer. It was really hot out, and I was wearing it. Like, it's very specific to clothing.
That's usually women.
I was probably wearing this no matter.
But people remember. I remember what I've worn, what I was wearing in important moments, and maybe even where I. But some people remember weather, and some people remember dialogue. But I was able, because of my Aunt Shirley, to actually have a piece in which the main characters were dead be fact checked by New Yorker fact checkers. Yeah. So that was a total aside. But the stories trickling down through her made me feel like I was part of a generational tapestry of people, of ancestors. On my mother's side, there was no such history and there was no such historian. I confess I was less interested. There's, I think, a lot of reasons for that. My mother, she was quite grandiose. And so when she would talk about her family, I tended to kind of turn down the volume a little bit because there was something about it that didn't feel
You think
totally
like things
true.
were being inflated or exaggerated?
Or just dramatized for their own purposes or my mother's purposes. It was very lopsided in terms of my own internal relationship to both parents and kind of where I came from. Even though I had a living grandmother on my mother's side and aunts and uncles, it still wasn't as present a family for me.
That's interesting. I mentioned I'm very close with my mother, knew my grandparents on her side very well into my 20s or 30s, knew my great-grandfather on their side, like until I was probably 10 or 11 years old, really knew them. My mother has kept incredible track of everyone. She knows all the cousins. She still discovers new cousins these days. It's a very big family because my grandfather and my great-grandfather, I think, had tons of siblings, so it really extends out.
Yeah.
And I've always just taken that for granted. It's like, those people are great. I see them all the time. As soon as I started learning things about my father's side of the family, which was a total mystery for 40-something years, any little nugget was just amazing. It was so spectacular. And when I finally ended up finding this family tree that it sounds like similar to your aunt's story, it was something that this guy who was the family historian, who is a great uncle, wrote in 1963, and he wrote it. It's a typed book. It's not a bound book, but it's like a sort of stapled together, like, 8.5 by 11 folded in half thing with an actual family tree with everyone's names. It has a page on everybody. It has photographs. It talks about them very eloquently. It talks about one woman having scars on her ankles from trying to escape as a slave and having been like the dogs biting her legs, like really detailed, crazy stuff.
How did you discover it?
But from 23andMe. I did 23andMe.
And that's how you discovered the family tree?
All of this came from that. Yeah, through a distant cousin who just very casually said, we're cousins, it's not a huge deal, but I have a family tree you might want to see if you haven't seen it, and sent it to me. And that just opened up everything. The most simple thing. It's really wild.
What a gift.
Yeah.
Complicated.
So complicated.
Yeah, so complicated.
Yeah, but it was fun to, of course, my father's black, my mother's white. I always knew and assumed that on my father's side, there was slavery in the family. This is America. But when I asked him about it at lunch, he couldn't tell me much or didn't want to. I think I think some people just aren't interested. And I think he was just like, I don't know.
Right.
But to get it and to see names and faces and dates and these things was just unbelievable. And in a strange way, felt so much heavier than my mother's side, which I just knew. So it was like, oh, that's no big deal. Those people are all great. I know them.
Right. But this was a mystery. And yes.
How many siblings do you have?
Well, that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
So when I describe my connection to my father's family, to those ancestors, to that footage, to that documentary, to my Aunt Shirley. As it turns out, he was not my biological father, and that was this secret that had been kept from me all my life. So one thing, if I had known that, it would have been a completely different story, a complicated story to be sure, but it would have been a different story. But finding it out, the answer to that question is I have a half-sister who I grew up with, who was 15 years older than I am, and was my father's daughter from his first marriage. And so we never lived in the same home. We had two different moms. She lived in New York City with her mom, and then she went off to college. I lived in New Jersey with my mom and dad, and it was, a complicated relationship too, because like I had our dad, and her parents had gotten divorced when she was 6, and she had lost her first stepmother. So she was very scarred by all that, and not so inclined to love me, right? I loved her. I mean, she was, she grew up to become a psychoanalyst. That was the first person I knew who wrote a book and published a book.
Adult sister to look up to that way. Yeah.
You are awesome, and can I follow you out of here, please? But it wasn't that kind of relationship. She was very sort of skeptical of me. So that was it for siblings. I was very much an only child, the way that I grew up. And what I would say now is, because my biological father, who I have since met and gotten to know, he has 3 kids. And the oldest of those kids is a girl, is a woman, who's only 6 years younger than I am.
Which probably feels very close compared to a sister that's 15.
It feels very close, yeah. She grew up with brothers, so she always wanted a sister.
Wow.
And has been incredibly open to having this relationship, and I feel very open to having a relationship with her. So I have this, we call each other sister friends.
Right. And you were well into adulthood when you made this discovery, right? Yeah,
this was 8 years ago. It was 2016 when I made this discovery.
And was this via a DNA testing?
Yes. So my husband wanted to send away for DNA test just as a lark.
To see what happened.
And I wasn't going to do it. He said, come on, it's like, I have an extra kit, whatever, he wasn't pressuring me to do it, but it just seemed like no big deal. My resistance to it really was, I know my family tree. I know everybody. The walls of my house are covered with their portraits and their pictures.
Yeah.
And then when my results came back, not so much.
Everything changed.
It was the first clue was the breakdown of ethnicity, because I would have expected to be 99% Eastern European Ashkenazi, and instead I was around 50% Eastern European Ashkenazi.
I think, am I correct in that we were both 51%?
That's about right. Yeah. It's like, what?
And you were surprised it was so low, and I was surprised it was so high.
Yeah.
My test. And so how did the cultural, or I guess religious and cultural, depending on how different people look at Judaism, how did that play into it for you? How different did you feel, I suppose, is the question.
That's been fascinating, and it's an ongoing process, and I think it's something that I will be, in a way, learning about and processing and thinking about for the rest of my life, because I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family. My father was Orthodox. His family were Orthodox. All of them. Not one single cousin out of a million cousins has strayed from Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Many of them, their kids and their kids' kids and their kids' kids' kids, are there, many of them.
Yeah.
I never felt like I fit into that family. I think even if you had asked me as a kid, I wouldn't have understood this question, but if you had asked me, do you think you're going to grow up and be religious? Do you think you're going to follow this path? You're going to marry someone religious and live this life? I knew that I wouldn't. My mother was an atheist, Jewish. Otherwise, my father couldn't possibly have married her. And probably, if she hadn't been his third wife, he wouldn't have looked twice at her, because she wasn't from, his first 2 marriages they were like dynastic, sort of unions of 2 Orthodox kind of families.
That serious.
Very much so.
Wow.
Yes. And with my mother, that, she grew up on a chicken farm in New Jersey and was, from socialist parents and
but Jewish.
But Jewish. Yeah. So when they were to be married, she agreed to raise any children that they might have Orthodox. that didn't go so well because you can't decide to be something if you are not that, if you don't believe. And she was not a believer. So she's, raising this child, sent me to, a yeshiva, Hebrew day school, and I was fluent in Hebrew, and the whole
bat mitzvah. You did everything.
I did a bat mitzvah, but that was a rebellion on my part because girls were not supposed to be a bat mitzvah. And the budding feminist in me was like, that's messed up. And what do you mean I can't read from the Torah? And what do you mean, like, what?
Right, the boys get to do it.
Yeah. And I still didn't get to read from the Torah. I think my father, as a challenge to me in a way, was like, okay, fine. Here's the Book of Ruth. It's so long, and I feel sorry for all. I apologize to anyone listening who was at my bat mitzvah because it must have been like the deadliest, most boring thing imaginable. But I wanted one, not for religious reasons. Probably I wanted the party and the gifts, but I also I didn't like that boys could. That was a rite of passage that was only true for boys.
Yeah,
there was another piece of this identity-wise, and this is something that I think has gotten a lot better in our culture, but. People would constantly say things to me like, you don't look Jewish. You can't possibly be Jewish. There's no way. I mean, people get mad at me, like think I was lying.
Yeah.
And I would double down and say, oh, raised 2 sinks, 2 dishwashers, kosher, fluent Hebrew, parents, grandparents, yeshivas all over the world. And why was I doubling down? I have more than one answer to that now. I would have said at the time, because I found it offensive.
Of course. I mean.
Yeah, and I still do.
It happens to be in various forms.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
Well,
yeah.
My son, when he was moving into his freshman dorm at Wesleyan, which is, one of the more, woke of the, liberal arts colleges.
Right. You'd think this wouldn't happen there.
And it doesn't. Right. Because on the wall, there were like signs of what you don't do, what you don't say. And what you don't say is where you're from.
The number one. Yes,
right. But people always have all the time.
Yeah, and they probably always will.
They probably always will, but maybe they think twice about it, or some people do, or they get chastised. But with me, it wasn't where you're from. It was no way.
That's impossible. You were wrong.
People felt free to comment on that all the time.
Yeah.
And I registered that as just this weird quirk of genetics that somehow I came out not looking like anybody in my family and in fact looking like I come from a different part of the world, which is what people were really saying.
Right.
Right.
But it's also, I guess depending on your age, you could have converted and you would be Jewish.
Correct.
It's also a religion. It's not, it's...
No, everything about it was wrong. And so I grew up going to synagogue and feeling like I didn't belong because I was constantly being told I didn't belong. Or I would go to...
More by people externally or people internally as well in your Jewish community?
Honestly, most of those comments were from Jewish people. Inside and outside my community. They just were mostly, not always, but for the most part. And it was meant as a compliment, which is the part I found really offensive.
My mother, who was Jewish, has some story. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it might have been like a ballet teacher or somebody. This is in Long Island in the 50s, maybe 60s. Someone saying like, you'll be good in this. You don't look that Jewish. As a compliment. It was something like that.
Yeah. They're these stunning things that people say. And I never entertained that the reason for that could actually be that my father wasn't my biological father. That seemed impossible. I was so connected to him and not as connected to my mother. So the thought was such a dangerous thought that I just didn't have it. The way that it has evolved in these 8 years in terms of my feeling Jewish is I actually feel more comfortable everywhere, including, Jewish events, Jewish, celebrations, synagogues, because now I know when people are looking at me, what they're seeing.
Right.
And I remember going to an awards dinner where a dear friend of mine was accepting an award, and it was a very Jewish benefit, and it was at the Pierre Hotel. And I went up to the bar and I was all dressed up and had my hair done. And I went up to the bar to get a drink, and behind the bar was this kind of modeled mirror, kind of like a antique mirror. And I caught a glimpse of myself. And when you catch a glimpse of yourself that you're not expecting to see? And in that moment, I thought, oh.
You saw it?
Yes. I saw myself the way that everyone in that room had seen me all my life. and what moved them to say what they would say. But now it was with this kind of freedom of, I see what they're seeing, I see why they're seeing it, and I completely belong here. All of that is true.
Right.
And that was a seminal moment. And the other one was during COVID, where at some point I decided, and I'm not a synagogue goer, but I have a rabbi friend who's just a rock star who I love his sermons. And so I joined his congregation, and on Friday nights, there were these Zoom services, and I was like in it for his sermon. But so there were all of these people on Zoom boxes. I would leave my video off, and I would see hundreds of people on these Zoom boxes. And week after week, I would see old people, young people, Black people, white people, Latina people. The cantor of this synagogue is female and Asian. And one day I thought, and I'm leaving my video off, why?
Right.
And then I turned it on. And the reason I realized, was that I didn't want to be judged. Like, what's that waspy blonde woman doing in our congregation? Right. And I thought, I had been identified that way by other people all my life, but it's never how I identified myself. And the freedom of getting to identify yourself fully in life is such a great gift and such a great privilege.
My mother and her husband go to a synagogue that sounds like your Zoom in Park Slope.
They probably know the synagogue.
It is everybody. It's so great.
Well, that's, if I had grown up that way, I'd still be going to synagogue.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
What's your relationship like with your biological father now? And that's 8 years, you said, since you made that discovery?
Yeah. It's really lovely. I don't talk much about it because at some point, a few years in, I think he had been so concerned about his privacy when he learned that he had this offspring that he didn't know about. It comes from, and this is something, I was conceived, my parents had fertility challenges and ended up using a sperm donor, and that's how I was conceived. In those days, and even I think in decades to follow, there's this kind of weird whiff of shame around sperm donation. It means that grandpa once, went into a room with a, copy of Playboy or whatever. It's an uncomfortable thing, especially for somebody who's lived their whole life completely forgetting that they had ever done that. Totally forgetting because it was meaningless. The men who did it were told that no one would ever know. They were most often medical students. And they were, they very much believed in, doing something that would be, for the good.
Right.
And they got paid a little something for it too. And that was a big motivation for why they did it as the kind of starving medical students. But they were absolutely guaranteed, as were the parents, that no one would ever know. And then,
different time.
Hello, Ancestry.com, hello, 23andMe, and all of this came tumbling out. So when I first met him, when I first contacted him, first of all, I think he was shocked, but he was also terrified that there might be others, which in my case, amazingly, there have not been. I have many friends who have multiple half-siblings.
Really?
I'm one who has well over 100. And that's just the reality of that world, is that it's unregulated. I think they were afraid. It's like, well, okay, there's this one woman and she seems okay, but like, what's behind her? So there was that fear. And also, when I sent him my first email, I also sent him my website just as a way of saying, like, no, I come in peace. I'm, a successful person in the world. And I think he saw that, but he also saw, if he looked at the homepage of my website, and I was aware of it even at the time, he would have seen two things. He would have seen a picture of me looking very much like him, and he would have seen a picture of me with Oprah.
Oh, okay, right.
And so this private physician living in the Pacific Northwest is like, I have a child I know about, and she's a writer, and she writes about family and identity, and she's there with Oprah. And I think he was so afraid that this was going to blow up somehow. And it wasn't a story he wanted to come crashing into his life, which is so often the case I've found with people who discover that they have children that they either hadn't known about or kind of decided that they didn't know about or didn't have anything to do with, is the feeling is often, what do you want?
Right.
It's primal. That's what, that's a conclusion I've come to, is that it's like a primitive, we're meant to know the people who are our immediate people. And then when somebody comes along who actually is as immediate as can be, but is a total stranger, it's such a, can I curse on this?
Yeah.
You know, it's such a mind fuck.
Yeah.
And so the initial feeling was one of distrust, and I let him know very early on that I was going to write a book about it. I mean, he is a very smart person. He would have known that I was, how was I, my whole life, all of my work has been about secrecy and identity and family in one way or another. I was taking notes, you know, by day 2. But I promised I would protect his identity, and I did protect his identity. And I even sent him the manuscript of my book, which I, you know, is memoirist 101, is you don't do that.
Right.
And I did because I wanted to be sure that he felt his privacy and his identity were protected. I also wanted him to like it.
Right. You're still building trust at that point, too. I mean, maybe still are. I don't know. But
well,
that's part of it.
I think we always will be.
Yeah.
At a certain point, we did meet, which I write about in the book. And then at a certain point later, we continued to meet. And at one point, I said to him, our relationship and, you know, whatever that looks like and wherever it goes from here, I'm not going to write another book about it. I mean, this feels like it's ours. And part of it is that I'm aware of how fortunate I am, of what a miracle it was on multiple levels. I could have never known this if my husband hadn't been one of these, you know, geeky early adopters of, he's never met any kind of technology he's not into. B, that I found him so easily and quickly. C, that even after a couple of bumps, he acknowledged that I was correct, and ultimately that he was willing to meet me.
Yeah.
And then that we had so much in common. It's a little bit of what you were describing when you met your father. When you've never seen that person and broken bread with them and sit across the table from them, that feeling of familiarity is so mind-blowing. It's sort of like looking at the sun. It's hard to keep looking at it.
Yeah,
it feels,
you almost want to look away.
It feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I saw that from the very first time the very first time I saw him was on a YouTube video. And he was giving a lecture. He gives lectures, and he was behind a podium. And what was really interesting about that was I give lectures and I'm behind podiums all the time. And he was running a Q&A and I run Q&As. It wasn't like he was a firefighter and there was an image of him like with a big hose putting out a fire in a building. He was doing something where I recognized my own gestures. Right. I saw the way that I moved my hands.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was the first thing I saw because initially I didn't see myself in this elderly man. I was sitting next to my husband and I kept on saying, wait, do we look alike? I think we look so much alike, but that's not what I first saw. What I first saw was this, this. And so I feel so thankful for this lovely, lovely family that have continued to be open to my family. That feels like something that then I don't keep mining for more material, because in a way also, I feel like I've learned so much about identity and secrecy and the toxic power of what it is to have a secret kept from you, and the way we're formed by these mysteries that we don't know. I mean, I don't know whether you've had this experience with that family tree and with discovering all these things, but kind of this sense, because it wasn't kept from you in a secret kind of way.
No, not at all.
But yet, it feels like there are these tentacles from the past that find their way up through this generational chain. And I mean, one example of that, in a lightning stroke of irony, my biological ancestors are about as far away from the shtetl. They came over on the Mayflower.
Wow. Okay.
And
the exact opposite of who you thought you were.
I mean, it's what people saw when they saw me. That's more like, it's like, okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But they were early settlers of certain places in New England where I have been, and I have felt very at home. And I like old whaling villages. I do. I've always, and it's like, why? I don't know. They're quaint, but
So
I feel
strange.
very comfortable in these kind of cobblestone, wooden shack-like kind of environments. And I won't say which island it was because it feels like an identifier, but I was on an island in Massachusetts, and there was a sign on the island pointing to oldest house. And I looked at the sign and I thought, I'm going to do a little research on oldest house. And I Google it, and sure enough, they are ancestors of mine. And I go to the oldest house.
You feel at
and
home.
I just stand there I stand there like kind of, what should I be feeling right now? I mean, I feel more, and I always will, about praying at the foot of my great-great-grandfather's grave in Haradok, Poland, than I ever will about standing in front of oldest house, because psychologically, emotionally, those are my roots. But at the same time, they're not my actual biological roots. And so I end up having this kind of incredible adventure of being kind of a thought experiment, like in human form, of nature versus nurture.
That's exactly what it is, right?
And they're both huge.
Right.
They're both
exist.
huge. They both exist. And sometimes when I was on tour for Inheritance, I would once in a while have an angry person who would accuse me of privileging nature over nurture, or believing that nature is more important than nurture. And I would turn to them and say, have you read my book? My mother was my biological mother, and she never really felt like my mother. My father was not my biological father.
Right.
And he is like the father of my soul, and I think about him every single day. And there was this man out there in the world where I actually get a tremendous amount of my nature from, and who I recognized the minute I met. And
also the idea of somebody arguing with your story when they could just go right there is
oh yeah
that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, well, it's threatening. Because I thought about that too, because I got it in a bunch of places, and I thought, why is that threatening?
Yeah.
And I think that this is the reason. I think it's because we think we can control nurture.
Right.
I mean, we can't even control
nurture.
That. Yeah, but like talk to anybody who has more than one kid, and it's like, same parents, different, humans, and same petri dish. And we can't really control nurture, but we feel like we can, or we certainly can control it more than we can control nature. We can't control nature at all.
I mean, the other siblings who I've met, one briefly, my father's kid who grew up with him, doesn't play music, into sports, which I am not, like very much real opposites, and much, I think, from what little I know, I'm closer to our father in a lot of ways than he is, at least from what little I know. And that to me is fascinating.
Fascinating and strange, and was probably strange for your father sitting and talking to you.
Right. What is family to you?
Family is love to me. I have friends who are every bit as much family to me as family.
Yeah.
And I have family who I hardly know. I do have a different feeling about ancestors, which is that I used to think that I loved my ancestors, but I actually don't think we can love our ancestors because we didn't share time with them. We never knew them, so they are the received stories that we've been told. And so I have this kind of, when it comes to my ancestors, I feel like I have those, the Puritans from New England, and the people of the shtetl, and the people of the chicken farm, and the socialism.
You've got it all.
I've got like a big wide net of ancestors, but I don't feel this kind of loyalty to them, if that, or bond. I love a holiday table that has people from every corner of life, who are the people that I love and that I care about the most. And then my little family is, my husband, who I've been married to for 27 years, and our 25-year-old kid. And that's like this beautiful, tight little bond.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. Please consider subscribing to Identified wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other major streaming platforms. And be sure to explore identifiedpod.com. the place to gain a better understanding of family. Our executive producer is Kiran Banerjee, and the show is produced by Palm Tree Island. The music for Identified is by Noella and Patricia Brennan. I'm Nabil Ayers. Thanks for tuning in.